Hi everyone, thanks for tuning in. EcoResolution is currently exploring our relationship with nature and how the psychological separation between our lives and the natural world might be at the heart of our climate and ecological crisis. Today we're joined by Hendrikus, the founder of Action for Conservation, an inspiring organisation on a mission to empower young people to protect the natural world. So thanks for joining us. How are you today?
Thank you very much, Ruby. I'm very well, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, no, it's great that you're here. Was really inspired to come across Action for Conservation, particularly because of the really empowering and emotive message of the organisation. And I love the words that you used were to move and empower young people. And then I can't remember the rest of it. It's about moving and empowering people to create change. And what was it that inspired you to start Action for Conservation?
So thank you, Ruby. Yes, hope is very much at the forefront of the work that we do, and a sense that we can all be moved and empowered. So it's wonderful to be discussing that today. So I founded the charity after visiting my old secondary school to talk to a group of teenagers. It was definitely not top of my list of things to do to walk into a room with a group of teenagers. At the time, I worked for WWF and I went back to talk about my work in conservation. And I went with a slightly lazy assumption that they wouldn't be engaged in what I had to say or interested in the work that I did, but found completely the opposite. Huge amount of inspiration in the room, huge amount of interest. And I came away really inspired by all of the young people I'd met and the passion they had for what we were talking about, and really felt, like it was a missed opportunity not to engage them and have them join the movement and support the work that we're all doing. So I kind of looked around at the time and there wasn't really much work geared towards engaging teenagers in particular in the environment and in nature conservation. So at that point, I sort of took the initiative and decided to set up Action for Conservation with a mission to inspire and empower young people to be a part of that change. And what we've now seen over the following 4 years is an amazing kind of growth and flourishing of the energy in that age group in particular. With the youth climate strikes and so on. So it's only growing, which is really wonderful to see.
It's so true. I remember when I was at school, there was a feeling that the environmental movement was kind of impenetrable and the figure of the activist was kind of this quite intimidating stereotype that definitely wasn't very approachable. And it's incredible to see over the last, even just the last few years, how much that's changed with the climate strikes and the climate movement in particular with the schools and just that feeling that anybody can make a difference. Yeah.
And it's absolutely, critical, that point, and it's central to our work is that we can all be environmentalists no matter what we end up doing, no matter what our day jobs. And so that's a message we really try to hammer home with young people is that, whatever they choose to do, they can have a positive effect in the future. We need a generation of green politicians, green bankers, green everything, green builders, green architects. It's not about what you do necessarily in the day job. It can be a part of your life and a part of your identity.
Yeah. And what was it that you were doing before when you were at WWF?
Working on forest conservation. So trade in illegal timber and UK government policy around the trade in timber and forest conservation abroad. So really interesting work, but quite different to what I find myself doing now.
And do you find that you're able to have more impact now working kind of on the ground directly with kids rather than with policy?
I think at the time it was quite a disheartening time to be working in policy. Not a lot was changing, and I certainly felt a real pull to more grassroots work. And so what's really exciting about the work we've been doing at Action for Conservation is it's grown from what was a project working in secondary schools to now building on that program, which is now called Wild Ed, which is our program of workshops that support students in designing and delivering their own environmental projects in school, to then our residential camps, which are much more immersive experiences and an opportunity for young people to build skills and inspiration and access a network of passionate peers, all the way through to our ambassador program, where we're supporting young people in really driving change at a meaningful scale and starting to have an effect on some of these institutions and drive systemic change in these institutions. So it's kind of come full circle in the sense that having begun at the grassroots, we're now back at the point where, we're working with young people to support those bigger changes, to change the way government and the wider environmental sector engages with young people and listens to young people and makes them a part of the decisions they're making and gives them the opportunity to contribute.
Yeah, it's really interesting, the relationship when it comes to like deep change or systemic change, the relationship between top down and bottom up. And it's something we think about a lot at EcoResolution, like this idea that individual change isn't enough. But then when does individual change become community change, and then the community change becomes systemic change? Likewise, when does policy change actually have a deeper impact? Particularly when like a lot of big corporations can't be monitored by many of the policies that are put into place because they're kind of unregulated or outside policy boundaries. So I love that kind of coming together of individual, community, systemic, and then just seeing the kind of relationship, and it becomes much more circular rather than like linear. Absolutely.
And they feed each other. I really hate it when people criticize this idea that we can all be taking individual actions. They say what the individual does is unimportant when we need these larger scale changes. It's all part of the same circle, as you say, and certainly for young people. Perhaps we'll get onto this discussion about connection to nature as well. There's a whole spectrum of experiences, and connection to nature might drive some young people to take action, but equally actions and being a part of action, however small, can also drive that connection to nature, and it has a self-reinforcing effect. And all of those actions combined can really contribute to greater change. And I think that's what we're seeing, and we can feel bubbling under the surface. I firmly believe that action at all levels is important.
Yeah. And also that perspective shift. Like sometimes it's even just how you perceive the world around you. It's not even before action. It's like how you perceive yourself within your environment then becomes your actions. And time in nature is the biggest way to change how you perceive yourself, because as soon as you kind of see yourself within a web of relationships rather than just an individual, that those actions and thoughts that you have that become your actions can be totally transformed.
Absolutely.
And what do you think of the role of emotional connection to nature in change making and conservation?
So I think it's hugely important. Certainly when we look at children and young people, we've seen a significant shift over the past 20, 30 years. Just 10% of children play in the natural environment compared to 40% of today's adults when they were young. The RSPB considers just 21% of children in the UK to have an adequate connection to nature. These are significant issues, and all of the evidence points to the fact that connection to nature has a transformative effect in terms of people's commitment to taking action, all of the things you mentioned, their sense of self. For children and young people growing up, it builds their confidence, their sense of agency, their mental well-being, their mental health. All of these aspects of a fulfilling life are significantly improved by a sense of connection to nature, and that can be any sort of connection. There's a wide spectrum of connections, and no one can say that someone living in the countryside and working in the middle of a forest has any different a sense of connection to someone who spends time in an area of urban green space that they feel deeply connected to and protective of and get to know. So, there's value in the smallest pockets in an urban area all the way through to our big wild spaces, wherever we find them in the world.
Did you ever have any big experiences when you were growing up that you think put you on the road you're on now?
Definitely. I grew up between the Dorset coast, the southwest of the UK, on the Jurassic Coast, which is a World Heritage Site, beautiful coastal region. Have a deep love for that place, between there and central Spain in the Guadarrama Mountains. So I had an incredibly privileged upbringing in that sense, and I draw on that, and it's certainly a huge inspiration for me. But I suppose the point I'm emphasizing is that, I needn't have had that. It's not a part of everyone's life in that way, but that doesn't mean that we can't all discover it wherever we find it. I suppose one of the concerns when I visited my secondary school on that first occasion was that, perhaps I was in a minority in caring about these things, and that was down to perhaps the experiences I'd had and was lucky enough to have. But actually, it transpires that everyone, I think, has this innate sense of care, and when shown what nature can provide them, and when experienced in perhaps a slightly different way, so that their perspective is shifted. All people can really build those really solid connections and draw on those in caring about the environment and taking action to protect it.
Are you living in the city now?
I live in the city now. I'm in the city of Bristol. We work across the UK. I lived in London before this, and we have offices in London, Manchester, and Bristol.
And when you feel do you find sometimes living in the city you feel disconnected? And then what do you do to kind of reconnect? Do you have things that you do?
Yeah. So anything from, and I think, it's not just about the city. It's the fact that the majority of my job is done from a desk. And sometimes you have to remind yourself to get out there. And it can be anything from, 5 minutes spent sitting in a area of green space near the house, to going on a longer walk into the park at the top of the road near where I live. So a whole variety of opportunities in the city. Even just looking out the window, it's just a case of having to remind yourself to do it sometimes. We do one of our activities on our residential camps for young people is something called sit spots, where we take young people out and we sit in silence and just reflect on the space that we're in. And that can be quite a daunting experience for a lot of young people who haven't maybe done that before, technology free, switched off and just sat there with their thoughts. But it comes up again and again in the feedback that has been for many the moment, the transformational experience that they've had on that residential camp that's changed their perspective. And every attendee of all of our camps comes away saying that they, as a result, will seek out more experiences, more time in nature where they live. So it really doesn't have to be much. It can be the smallest of moments. But yes, it's more difficult in a city, I think.
Yeah, I love the sit spot practice. We do that sometimes when we run retreats as well, and it's the most for developing awareness and sensory connection. It's really amazing, and creating that sense of peace. But I saw you've got online content, loads of online stuff happening now. Is that because of coronavirus?
Yeah, so that's been our response. to the situation. We've had to pause all of our work in schools, postpone our residential camps and all of our events with our ambassadors. We're still managing to run another project of ours, the Pen Pump project, which we might discuss virtually. But for the most part, most of our engagement work has paused. And so we've kind of taken that time to reflect. It's something we discussed for a long time, is how we can use the online sphere to engage young people, to use it as a tool to meet them where they are. And that's not to say that the internet has all the answers. We've just discussed the importance of physical connection to nature and being in it, but it's such a valuable tool. And so, we decided to launch Wild Web, which is an online action program to support young people in learning about different topics at home, and then being supported in taking action in a guided way, and with the support of mentors within our team and volunteer base in their homes. And that can be any sorts of action from any scale. And the idea is that in the process, they'll be supported in developing some of those skills and building that sense of agency, and that they'll take that out into the world post lockdown, post corona, whatever that world looks like, to help them drive a better future, create a better future.
Are you nervous about the impact of coronavirus on activism and conservation?
Yeah, I'd say I'm nervous and optimistic in equal measure. I think that it represents a huge threat. I think we're already seeing, a degrading of environmental protections under cover of COVID. We're seeing that with Trump. There are certainly issues here in the UK as well, and abroad. I think so. There are immediate risks to the environmental protections that we have. There are also huge risks to all sorts of species and habitats across the world, whose conservation is dependent on tourism. So I suspect we'll see an increase in poaching and illegal activity in some of our most precious spaces around the world, as a result of a lack of protection and a lack of resources to protect them. And so that's a worry, and it's very much a worry for Indigenous people as custodians of those spaces. The double whammy of COVID and the impact that will have on them, but also the effect that a loss of income to protect those spaces will have. So that's a huge worry, I think. But the flip side is that we are seeing how we can react collectively and show compassion to each other in a crisis. I feel like this moment might represent a pivotal shift in how we see crises, large scale global crises, and that hopefully will translate into action on climate change and biodiversity loss, the extinction crisis. And I think we've shown how we can reduce our impact at the same time in quite a short space of time. And then I think added to that, the fact that we know that our behaviours towards the natural world, our actions, have an intimate connection, and our farming practices have an intimate connection to the source of this virus and future viruses that will likely spread around the world as a result of our incursions into natural spaces, and our practice of converting wild spaces into farmland.
Yeah. You were at the beginning, you were mentioning what governments were doing, Trump and our own in the UK. Mm. Did you mean that more in context of laws being ushered in as we're all focused on other things? Or is it new policies that they're doing? Yeah, no.
So in the case of Trump, for example, US federal agencies are easing fuel efficiency standards for new cars. They're proposing to drop review requirements for fossil fuel. They're degrading the protections that are already in place. And in the case of the UK, we obviously have HS2 and the controversies around that. and obviously people's attention is elsewhere. I think Naomi Klein talks in one of her books about the risks of what's called the Shock Doctrine. Essentially, figures of authority use crises like this to solidify their grip and the power that they have. And so there are risks to our existing protections, on a large scale, I'd say.
Yeah. And also the threat of economic crash, that then putting money into fossil fuels and ramping up in that way.
Yeah. And equally, the potential for bailing out big businesses that really should have any financial aid tied to improved environmental protections. We're seeing France is leading the way in looking at how, in supporting airlines, they can also reduce emissions in the process. And I think we should all be looking to a green recovery rather than a recovery at all costs.
Yeah, a green recovery would be amazing. I do worry a bit about greenwashing, though. I know that's an old worry that's been spoken about for a long time. But we did a screening recently of The Story of Plastic and an interview with Annie Leonard afterwards. Have you watched The Story of Plastic?
I haven't. No.
It's great. It's about plastic, and it's made by the team at Story of Stuff. And they talk about the roots of plastic within fossil fuel, obviously, and how a lot of the big corporations are now getting ready for the decreased investment within fossil fuels, but simply by ramping up production of plastics, because obviously it's from the same source, and shipping them these plastics all around the world, and the different standards. So in the West, and particularly the global North, a lot of our products are supposedly recyclable. Then most of it isn't actually recyclable or doesn't get recycled. But then they have completely different policies in the global South or the East, whatever term you want to use. And in these other places where there's less stringent rules, the very same companies, Unilever for one, all these very thin film plastics that are impossible to recycle or to reuse in any way. Anyway, it was very interesting. And it just really highlighted what is said isn't necessarily what is done. Yeah,
absolutely. There was an interesting piece yesterday in The Guardian about we've had greenwashing, we've had youth washing, there are all sorts of washing, but the new one is COVID washing. So, companies who are PR teams who are generating good press about corporates in relation to COVID-19 and their response to it, whether that's creating ventilators, even if those ventilators don't end up being used or made, or whatever, to kind of signal their value to society, particularly now where their value is in question. But yes, I suspect greenwashing in the current crisis is as much a risk as it was before and will be after, and perhaps enhanced by the situation we're in.
But back to hope. What does give so much hope is the capacity for environments to regenerate.
Yeah.
And that's something I loved about your Penpoint project, which you mentioned earlier, which is it ecosystem restoration camps?
Yeah. So it's the largest. The Penpoint project is the largest youth-led nature restoration project in the world that we know of its type. And what it is really an opportunity for a group of young people, 20 young people, to work in partnership with a landowner and tenant farmers who currently farm that land, to explore a better future for food and nature, and a more harmonious future. So it's very early stages at this stage. We're in the process of establishing what species live on the site. At this point in time, it's a 350-acre site in the Brecon Beacons National Park in Wales. So we're doing baseline research surveys to establish what's there, as we start to develop a strategy, a plan for what's going to happen at that site over the coming decades. And what makes the project really special, I think, is two things. The first is that young people are a part of the process from the beginning. They're a part of developing this strategy, a part of having all the difficult conversations and finding a way forward. And so they're at the heart of leading this project. And there's a very clear intention to turn the site into an education resource, to turn it into a gold standard of youth-led action, an exemplar to NGOs, governments in the UK and abroad. But the other exciting factor is that we're working with the farmers, and that this is a future that's being explored with them, and food production is a part of that conversation. So yeah, it's a really exciting project to be involved in. Very much in its infancy.
That's so cool. And so how does that work at a practical level? So with your involvement of farmers, so you're going to be growing food, or is it going to be rewilding, or how does that work?
Well, so the short answer is we don't know yet. We're at the stage of exploring what projects exist across the UK. We were meant to visit the Knepp estate in Sussex a few weeks ago, but obviously the visit was called off. So we attended with members of the youth leadership group for the project and the other project partners. We attended a webinar, morning webinar, looking at the site, and we'll return next spring. We'll be visiting a number of sites over the next year or so, collecting the learnings and bringing those together to think about a way forward. And yeah, there's no, I can't say what the outcome will be, because that's being defined by, the young people. I suspect it will be a combination of, changing farming practices, potentially some kind of practical restoration efforts, and then some more natural regenerative, processes in there, as well. But it will be an open-ended, project, without necessarily at this stage, at least, clear goals in mind. It's a process-driven approach. So yeah, it's an interesting and perhaps difficult project to get your head around because of that. But it's very exciting. It's experimental.
I love the collaborative aspect of it, and particularly the coming together of farmers with conservationists and potentially rewilding aspects, which doesn't come into contact so often. Like, it's so common for people to be pitted against each other in this kind of them and us polarization, which isn't going to get us anywhere when it comes to kind of climate action and change. Do you have anything to say on that relationship?
Yeah, I mean, it's the word rewilding has become a very polarizing word, a bit of a toxic word in some circles. And so we've chosen not to use that word. It's unfortunate that word has become so polarizing. I don't think it had to be. It's more about how, as you say, people work in partnership and different decision-making factions come together to develop an approach. And so we're trying not to label what we're doing. And we think that's quite important, because it is something that is, growing out of the partnership. We recently signed a memorandum of understanding, effectively a contract with all the partners, establishing our kind of values as a group. And I think that kind of organic process of decision making, a kind of ground up again approach is the only way that this will be successful. And it needs to be successful because agriculture is one of the biggest drivers of biodiversity loss on Earth, a significant contributor to emissions. 37% of our land area globally already is farmed. And in the UK, that's 71%. And where we're working in Wales, 90% of the land is farmed. And so if we're to have any hope of restoring nature and, ensuring that what's there isn't lost, then we need to come up with more regenerative forms of agriculture. And we need to be working with farmers as guardians of the land. And we need to involve other groups, including young people who currently have limited opportunities to engage with that. I mean, less than think it's less than 3%. Don't quote me on this. I think it's less than 3% of farmers in Wales are under 30. There aren't a lot of new entrants into the business, so we need to be engaging people in our land and in our food that we grow and how we grow it, or we don't have a hope of solving these problems.
I love thinking about that the comparison of the Darwin quotes. I can't remember what it is, but obviously there's the idea of survival of the fittest, which is often used as the like moniker of competition, individualism, like self-betterment, but in quite a negative way. And then the other concept that he would speak a lot more about was collaboration. But for some reason, perhaps unsurprisingly, a lot of our culture has taken the survival of the fittest to be synonymous with Darwin, when actually he was talking always about collaboration, and that collaboration being the key kind of shared aspect of species that have thrived.
Really interesting. Yeah, and evolution is a blind process. It might be survival of the fittest, but it's not like anyone's aiming to survive necessarily in our sense of the word. I like that too. I think collaboration is key, and we're a social species and a collaborative species. We need to play to our strengths. Working with other people is absolutely essential. We always say to young people, conservation isn't it's not really about, animals and plants. It's about people. It's about people's behavior and working with people to create positive change. That's where the changes come.
Connections that go beyond ourselves as well,
exactly,
like to others and to the environment.
Yeah.
And what's your new book? I read the title is How You Can Save the Planet.
Yeah, so really exciting to be publishing the book in August this year with Penguin. We were in touch last year, and they really wanted a book for young people. It's obviously the time to have a book for young people on the environment, and I was really interested in particular writing a book for young people that blended actions and practical steps young people could take, but also the stories of amazing young people leading change, and not just the Gretas of this world, but young people leading change sometimes in small ways, but in really positive and hopeful ways. So that's essentially the concept, is that it's a combination of step-by-step actions, over 30 different actions that young people can take, everything from smaller actions in their garden or in a local green space, all the way through to setting up campaigns to really change and tackle some of those big issues, and then combined with the stories of a dozen inspiring young people some of whom I've worked with through Action for Conservation, others across the world who are leading change, it's been a really exciting book to write, and I really hope that it might make a small contribution to the movement among young people. What we need, we're seeing with the climate movement is young people having a voice, sharing their voice, but I think increasingly they're feeling disappointed that voice isn't being listened to. And I think what we really need, alongside young people sharing their voice, having that voice, is a movement rooted in practical action, and in taking action ourselves, and not waiting for these bigger changes and these bigger players to make changes, but to really lead that change at an individual level as well. It's been exciting. Quite a quick turnaround. So I wrote it, well, we're still in the process of editing it, but about 3 months.
Wow. Rewriting all day, every day? Or?
Well, yes, I was on paternity leave for December, so I used that time to write the book, which I'm dedicating it to my son, so hopefully he'll forgive me for being a little bit absent in those first few weeks.
Exactly. That's amazing. And you mentioned there were 30 actions. So if you were to choose 5, what would those 5 actions be?
Good question. Well, let me have a look. Hang on. Putting me on the spot. I can't pick favourites. So I think planting a tree is, a wonderful thing. Something I think I wish every young person could have the opportunity to do. It's a legacy, and I think it's a hugely grounding thing to do. Forgive the pun. I think it, really connects you to that place forevermore. So that's the first one. The second one is I'll try and do one from each chapter. So the second one is I think getting on a bike. So in this case, setting up a cycle to school club. For me, it would be getting on my bike to work. Just prioritizing, walking, cycling, public transport as much as possible in your life, and finding ways to do that and to make it work, even if it isn't always the most convenient. So there's an action on that. What else? Food. So there's a chapter on food. So I think growing your own food is a hugely empowering thing to do, and gives you a huge sense of success if it goes well, which it doesn't always. And that can be as simple as, which I'm currently doing in my kitchen, is just cutting off the bottom of a lettuce and putting it in some water and letting it re-sprout, and then you can plant it out. It can be as simple as that, and you've grown something. So I think, growing your own food in whatever shape or form that takes. I'm trying not to give too much away here. I'm walking a fine line. What else have we got? So there's an action on upcycling. So turning disused things that are at the end of their life into more interesting things that you want to continue using. There's also an action on setting up a swap shop, secondhand clothing swap shop at school. So that's quite a fun one. And then there are a number of campaigns in the book, from kind of setting up a campaign to reduce litter in your local area, to beach cleaning up rivers, to campaigning to change the way supermarkets package foods to the foods they source. Real range of things. I'm being a bit vague. I'm not sure how much I should give away.
You've given away plenty. That sounds so great.
Well, what I hope with the book, it is for young people, but it's for all people, and definitely the actions, they're all actions I have taken or want to take, and they can be fun. And there's loads of organisations in the book. In the UK, there's a list of organisations around the world who can support young people and old people in taking action. So I hope it will be useful.
It sounds brilliant, and that's such a key word, fun, because often being like environmentally conscious or aware of your impact is seen as being boring, but that definitely couldn't be less true. I think trying to be aware of the impact you're having definitely is so much fun. If you can cycle instead of taking the tube, or try and upcycle something, or suddenly try and grow your own food, all of these things are extremely fun. Definitely.
And even more so when you know why those things are important. And that's what what I've really tried to bring out is this is why it's important. This is what you can do. And you might not do it this way, and this might not be applicable where you are. But here are some ideas. Go off and give it a try, and, it'll be fun. And here are other young people who are leading change in all sorts of interesting and creative ways. I think one of the most inspirational quotes, I think, in the book is from a young person who's featured in one of the stories. And he said, as part of a longer quote, if everyone is unique and brings their personality, we can solve the problem in different ways. And I think that's so true, is that, if we bring what's special about us, and this goes back to that point of everyone being an environmentalist, no matter who they are, if we bring our personality and our creativity to these problems, then we're going to have more fun in the process, and we're likely going to come up with better solutions.
Yeah, I love that, because everybody being unique, but then as a community being so strong for being so, amazing. Well, thank you so much. Yeah, we should probably wrap up. I wonder if there's anything else.
I mean, I think we've covered loads. That's great.
Yeah, we have. Yeah, thank you so much for your time. I've loved chatting and looking forward to your book coming out and reading it myself.
Thank you. Well, I will share it with you on Instagram.